My dear students, this is your accounting coach ARD, and the topic of the day is errors in suspense account. Now, before going through this lecture, I will strongly recommend you that you watch my previous lecture on errors with the name as errors not affecting trial balance. So, if we talk about errors, the errors can be broken into two categories. They can be classified into two broad types. One is errors that do not affect trial balance, and secondly, we have errors that do affect trial balance. Now, as you may be aware, what is a trial balance? Whenever we are making T accounts, that T accounts are balanced at the end of the period, and the balance brought down, which was balance carried down at the end of the previous accounting period, becomes balance brought down for the current accounting period. So the balance brought downs, all of the balance brought downs, there is the list of all of the balance brought downs, which is known as list of all balance brought downs is a trial balance. Now there are two types, one is debit side, one is credit side. As you may be aware, asset, expense and drawing come on debit side, and liability, income and capital always comes on the credit side. Now at the end of the period, the trial balance should have been balanced, so the debit side always equal credit side. But there may be a situation that the trial balance does not balance. So previously we discussed there were six types of errors that do not affect trial balance. Now we are discussing errors that do affect trial balance. Errors that do affect trial balance means the trial balance is disbalanced because of the result of that error. Means the debit and credit side no longer balance. Debit side is different and the credit side is different. They are not alike. So what we need to do, we need to correct those errors. Now firstly, if you have studied the previous lecture that errors do not affect trial balance, you may have seen that there were fancy names given to these errors, such as error of commission, omission, principal, reversal, original entry and compensating errors. But here, when we are talking about errors that do not affect trial balance, there are no names given to these errors. There are no fancy names. So these names are not even asked by the examiner when you have sitting for an exam. The examiner won't be asking you to identify the names of the errors. Now the question is that, sir, if there is no name for these errors that do affect trial balance, how can we identify that this error has been incurred? Now the rule of thumb is that you must remember one thing. What we need to remember this: whenever double entry is whenever we break a double entry, whenever double entry is disturbed, mean the debit side is different and credit entry is different, the double entry is break. Whenever the rules of double entry are broken, this means this is error that affecting trial balance. When the trial balance would be affected, when the debit, for example, we have made a debit entry and we forgot to make a credit entry, and vice versa, we have made a credit entry and the accountant forgot to make a debit entry, or we have made both a debit and credit, both entries, but both with a different amount. Debit entry is with 1000 and credit entry is with 100. So there is a difference in the debit and credit side. This means that trial balance will be affected. So whenever the trial balance is affected, we can use a suspense account. Now what is suspense account, my dear students? Suspense account is a temporary account just used for the sake of balancing the trial balance on a temporary basis. Suspense account is basically a temporary account that we use. So how can we use the suspense account? Let me give you an example. My dear student, example is that the debit side is, for example, 10,000 and the credit side is 9,000. Now which side is shorter? The shorter side is credit side, because the debit side is 10,000 and the credit side is 9,000. So there is a shorter side is the credit side. So what we need to do, we need to insert a temporary balance 1000 with 1000 on the credit side, just to make sure the debit and credit side both balance. Now the amount that we are putting on the credit side, 1000, what is this balance? This will be known as suspense balance. Now whenever we put an amount in order to balance the trial balance, means the both sides are equal, so this is known as suspense account. Now what we will be doing, On a temporary basis, we just insert the suspense account in order to find out, in order to balance the trial balance. But in the long run, whenever we are making final accounts, we need to remove that suspense. Now, let me give you example. Most of you watch movies or maybe TV series or Netflix series. Now, for example, the Netflix series, and in that series, there is a serial killer who is killing all the men or women maybe, and now at the end of the series, this killer must be found. So if the Netflix is not revealing who was the killer, basically means now you are expecting there will be further episodes for this TV series. Now maybe this is season 1, and in the season 2 they will reveal who was basically the serial killer. Now the suspense should be eliminated at the end of the series. Okay, I hope you are trying to get my point. The suspense should be eliminated before making final accounts. Now this is not correct that maybe you are buying shares for a company and then you decide to buy for a company, you buy shares for a company, and when you try to study the accounts of that company, in that company there is a, for example, $5 million suspense balance. So obviously you would your confidence would be shattered with this. You will be saying that if I'm investing money into this business, they don't know where does their $5 million went. So I would never invest in such a company who does not know where his money is going. Okay, so in the final accounts, the suspense should always be eliminated. Now there is no name of that errors. I already told you previously. Now let me give you the scenario with the help of an example. Dear students, to explain you the concept of suspense account, I made my own example. The example is debit side of the trial balance is greater by 5,000 than the credit side. Means debit side is greater than, because, and therefore the credit side is lesser by 5,000. So our debit side is more than the credit side, then that means the shorter side is credit side. On investigation, it was found the following errors occurred. Now the 3 errors are there that I've given here. One is sales overstated by 1,000. The examiner uses the word overcasted or overstated. It means the same thing. Sales overcasted by 1,000, overstated by 1,000, then it should have been. And purchase are also overcasted by 2,500. This means over totaled. And the third error is that payment to a creditor $3,500 forgot to enter in cash book. Means we have recorded one side of the transaction, but we have not recorded the other side of the transaction. A payment to a creditor forgot to enter in the cash book. Means we have debited the supplier account, but we have forgot to credit the bank account. Now what is the requirement here? Requirement is make journal entries, means debit, credit, journal, and suspense account. And whenever we make a suspense account, we also need to clear that suspense account. Now what I am doing, I am making journal entries for these transactions. My dear students, in the first transaction we have overstated the sales. As you may be aware, whenever the sales increases, it is always credited. Why? Because an asset goes down, the stock is going out of the business. And we can also remember this, that sales is an income is always credit. So in order to understand this topic clearly, you must have very strong grip on double entry. If your double entry is weak, then you won't be able to solve examination question for this topic. We have overstated the sales is increased when credited, and now if you have overstated it, now we need to reduce the sales, we need to debit the sales account. The sales would be debited by 1,000, and what would be credited? My dear students, remember one thing, whenever there is nothing on any side, so we'll be using a suspense account. When there is nothing to debit or credit, we'll be using suspense account. So sale will be debited, we need to reduce the sales account, and the suspense account would be credited. Suspense can come on any side, so there is no faith of suspense account, it can come on any side. Then purchase is overcasted by 2,500. We have also increased our purchase account by 2,500. So now we need to decrease our purchase account. As you may be aware, purchase is always debited when it is increased. Why? The stock is coming into the business and the asset of stock increasing. Similarly, purchase is also a cost or an expense for the business, therefore it is debited. So we have overcosted the purchase. Now we need to credit the purchase account. In order to reduce it, the purchase account will be credited. Now what we'll be doing, we'll be debiting something. We do not know what to debit, so we'll be using a suspense account. So in any side, when there is nothing to debit or credit, there always comes a suspense account. And thirdly, we have payment to creditor forgot to enter in the cash book. Now whenever we pay our supplier, the entry is trade payables or account payable debit, and bank account would be credited. Account payable is debited because account payable, the nature of trade payables is liability, and liability always increases by credit, and if we not to decrease the liability, liability would be debited. So what we have done, we have already debited the liability account, but we have forgot to enter this transaction the cash book because the cash or bank balance is reduced, so the bank would be credited now. So if we have decreased the bank account, what we need to do, we need to debit something. So we cannot debit the trade payable account. Why? Because it has already been debited, so we need to debit the suspense account. So we have successfully made the journal entries for the above three transactions. Now we are in the process of making suspense account. Now we have already discussed, my dear student, that suspense account is a temporary account that is used for to balance the trial balance on a temporary basis, and then we need to find out these errors, and once the errors are found, we need to correct those errors. So my dear student, first of all, we need to write the opening balance for suspense account, and the opening balance for suspense account is written by difference as per trial balance. As you can see here, the debit side of the trial balance is greater by 5,000. Means in our scenario, our debit side is greater than credit side. So this means the shorter side is credit side. So whenever the side that is shorter will be using suspense balance there, and the difference is 5,000. So we'll be increasing our credit side by 5,000 with the help of the suspense balance. So the difference as per trial balance would be 5,000. We won't be writing a balance BD here. We'll be writing difference as per trial balance. Now we have already corrected all those errors. We need to insert these journal entries into suspense account. Now as far first entry is concerned, as you may see in the first entry, suspense account is crediting by 1,000. So what we need to do, we need to credit the suspense account by 1,000, and the reference would be sales. As you may be aware, whichever account is credited, the reference would be the account that should have been debited. So the account that is credited uses the reference of the account that is being debited. And in the second entry, suspense account is debited by 2,500. So we'll be debiting suspense account, and the name that we'll be using is purchases. So thirdly, we have suspense account is debiting again, and in this time we'll be using the reference of bank because the opposite entry is passed in a bank account. So my dear students, all of the entries we have just corrected it, and now lastly what we need to do, we need to balance this account. As you may balance these both sides balance should come the same, and if the balance is not coming equal and there is some balance remaining in a suspense account, this means that you have showed some of your inner talent. You are very talented, by the way, I know that. So you have shown your inner talent, so the account should have been cleared anyway. Okay, so lastly I need to also tell you one more concept, and that concept is this: sometimes it can also happen that this difference as per trial balance 5,000 is not given in the question. So the examiner does not tell you that which side of the trial balance was greater or shorter. If we remove this sentence of 5,000, we do not know which side is greater or lesser. So what we need to do, we need to make all these entries and we need to insert all of these into this, and we need to find this difference as per trial balance ourselves. How we need to find this difference as per trial balance ourselves, my dear students? We can find this way, that we can see which side is greater. Obviously the debit side is greater. The debit side is 6,000 and the credit side is always only 1,000. So what we need to do, we need to deduct 1,000 from the 6,000 in order to find this balance. Now this balance is coming 5,000. Okay, so sometimes this difference as per trial balance we need to find. And one more thing you need to remember, you do not know that the difference on the trial balance will come on the debit side or the credit side. So whenever we are making entries, we need to make one line, leave one line blank on the debit side also, and on the credit side also, just leave one line blank. So whichever the shorter side is, we need to write this difference as per trial balance. So I hope, my dear students, you understood the concepts underlying suspense account and the errors that do affect trial balance. And if you benefit from this video, kindly do share it with your other class students, and also subscribe my channel if you haven't done so. Thank you.